It was a Wednesday night, June 17th, 2015. It's church night for believers who worship at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina. I want us to have the image squarely in our minds. Men and women gathering together to read the Bible and pray. And meanwhile, 100 miles away, a defendant gets into his car and drives towards Charleston. Mile marker after mile marker, exit after exit, he keeps driving towards his church, this particular church. And when he arrives at this historically significant black church in downtown Charleston, the members do exactly what the Bible teaches. They welcome a stranger. They opened their hearts and they prayed for him. They opened their arms and they welcomed him. And he, on the other hand, opened fire, murdering them as he hurled racial and religious epithets. He murdered 9 black Christians because they were black and Christian. He murdered all but one of these believers who welcomed a stranger. He left one woman alive so she could tell the world of his hatred and bigotry. The FBI botched the background check on this shooter when he bought the firearm, and this week the Department of Justice settled a lawsuit because of what the FBI failed to do. But money won't bring you back from the dead, and money won't dull the pain of knowing someone you loved was killed only because they were black and Christian. The killer was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in federal court. There's no word on whether those on the left think the death penalty is too barbaric and inhumane for someone who systematically executes Christians because they're black. This is but one attack on a house of worship in our country. How has hate seeped into the soul of America? And what can people of good conscience do to put an end to it? Dr. Russell Moore is a theologian, and he joins us now. Dr. Moore, what is going on in this culture of hate in this country?
Well, it seems that the world is going through a nervous breakdown right now. There are increased divisions and attacks really across every institution. And maybe most troubling of all would be these attacks that happen on houses of worship. Because if you think about it, Trey, a house of worship represents the quest for ultimate meaning. People are gathered together to think about issues of life and death and more than life and death. And for someone to attack that sort of an institution where people are praying and vulnerable, it ought to really shock the conscience. And that's what we saw in Charleston 6 years ago. Represented the depths of human hatred, but it also then represented sort of the best aspects of humanity in the aftermath as that community in Charleston came together and sought to minister to Mother Emanuel. We have to be communities that are standing up for one another, and that means standing up for houses of worship that we might not agree with theologically or in other ways, and saying we're not going to have this sort of hatred and violence happening to anybody of any religion in any house of worship.
Dr. Moore, I have become something of a cynic later in life, which doesn't mean I'm wrong. But the line between politics and religion just seems to be obliterated now. I mean, politics seems to be a religion now.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the things that I hear constantly all day long are churches that are divided over political questions, or people in communities who have the sort of fervency about politics that really tends to make it ultimate in ways that can strip away our understanding of seeing one another as created in the image of God, as bearing dignity, apart from these political divisions that we might have. Something has really gone wrong in American culture, and we should right it.
Well, you're the theologian and I am not, but I'm going to ask you a couple of theological questions. I think there was a Jewish carpenter who talked about loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you and being in the world but not of the world. I wonder what he would tell us to do.
Well, I think he would tell us to look to him, that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And I think that part of the problem right now is that we're all consumed with our earthly lives, and we're consumed with lashing out at one another. rather than asking the really the deepest questions that we can possibly ask, which is, what is a person for? What is a life for? Where are we ultimately headed? Not everybody would agree with me that eternal life comes through Jesus Christ, but we all ought to agree that those are questions worth asking. And when they're not, we tend to replace something else. We tend to find something else to replace that quest for meaning with, and that's always going to lead to disillusionment and, as you say, to cynicism.
Well, Dr. Moore, I was looking through the Old Testament earlier today, and I saw a conversation between God and Satan. At least it's recorded in the Old Testament. And then in the New Testament, there's a conversation between Jesus and Satan. And I was struck that there was more civility in those two conversations than there is in most political debates that will take place around the Thanksgiving table. So maybe we could just start with civility. Thank you for joining us, especially on a Sunday night, Dr. Moore.
Thank you for having me.